Well, what a week it's been. The Speaker of the House of Commons smacks down the government twice. Two separate rulings. And the budget debate continues. We have an opposition day motion on the defense minister, some other events that I will share with you about. And there are 3 sitting days left after today before the summer adjournment begins. And there's a great deal of speculation that an election will be called sometime this summer or the early fall. So this might be the dying days of this parliament. Again, we have 3 more days next week, and they will prove to be very interesting, in part because of 2 recent speakers' rulings. Now, these speakers' rulings were made by Anthony Rota, who was elected as speaker at the beginning of this parliament. It's important for people to understand the speaker is elected from among MPs, and generally they're elected from the governing party. Anthony Rota was elected as a Liberal. Now, as speaker, he is impartial. He is nonpartisan in the context of that role. But he was elected originally as a Liberal, and he has served for a long time previously as a Liberal MP. So it is significant that a person who in their role as speaker is impartial but was elected under the Liberal banner would so directly be smacking down the government over their abuses of Parliament and their abuses of process. So the first issue on which there was a speaker's ruling had to do with Bill C-10. Many of you have been following Bill C-10. We've been giving you updates on that. It is the bill that deals with freedom of speech. You're trying to use the broadcasting regulations to allow the CRTC to police essentially what is seen on social media platforms. Now, what happened is the government passed a motion in the House of Commons to limit the amount of time that this could be considered on at committee. And so that time expired, the 5 hours they'd set for committee. And that in and of itself was an abusive process that hasn't happened in decades. But that motion passed, the Liberals and the Bloc working together to shut down debate and try to push this anti-free speech bill forward. After those 5 hours elapsed at committee, that was supposed to be the end of it. But the Liberals still had amendments that they wanted to bring forward on that bill. So they asked the chair of that committee, also who had been elected as a Liberal, who is a Liberal, Scott Sims, they asked the Liberal chair if they could continue to vote on the amendments that they wanted to the bill. They didn't want any more debate on the bill, but they wanted to be able to vote on and adopt their preferred amendments at the committee stage. And the chair said, no, you can't do that. He said that the rules don't allow us to vote on amendments after the time has elapsed for debate. Because if you're going to vote on amendments, they have to be read, they have to be debated. At that point, the Liberals challenged and overruled the chair with the support of the Bloc. And so what then happened was there were votes taken on these amendments at committee, even though they weren't read. They weren't debated. The speaker would simply, the chair would say, we're debating this particular amendment we're debating Liberal amendment number 7, and then everyone would vote. And what the amendment actually was never read out. There was no debate allowed. There were no sub-amendments allowed. It was simply voted on after the number was said. Horrific abuse of process, right? We could never imagine this would happen in Canada, that committees would be compelled to vote on amendments to critical legislation dealing with freedom of speech without even having the amendments read, without having any debate or opportunity for sub-amendments to those amendments. That was the process that happened at committee. The bill was then reported back to the House of Commons saying, hey, here's the bill, the revised bill with all these additional Liberal amendments that we wanted to add. And then the Conservative whip raised a point of order saying the process that happened at committee on this was broken and violated the rules. The Speaker ruled that indeed that was correct, that the rules had been violated at committee by overruling the chair's ruling and ignoring the way in which these time allocation motions are supposed to proceed. So all of those extra Liberal amendments were thrown out. So the bill that's actually before the House is a bill without many of these later Liberal amendments. What will likely happen if we come back to Bill C-10 is that the Liberals will try to move those same amendments at report stage in the House of Commons. But then they will have to be debated, and each of them individually will be voted on. So the Liberals were trying to push this through without debate, without even reading the amendments. And now these items will actually have to be debated and voted on the floor of the House of Commons. This isn't what the Liberals wanted, because they wanted to push this bill attacking freedom of speech. They wanted to push it through as quickly as possible with as little debate as possible. Now they will be more constrained in their ability to do that. But we may not even get to debate again on Bill C-10. And let me explain why. This has to do with the second point of order, the second question of parliamentary privilege, actually, that was raised and ruled on by the Speaker. So those of you who follow these videos regularly will have seen the updates I've been bringing you about this issue with the Wuhan Institute for Virology in Wuhan, where the coronavirus pandemic started, and the Winnipeg Microbiology Lab. Now, here's the story. The Winnipeg Microbiology Lab is Canada's top security lab. It does work on dangerous pathogens. It has or is supposed to have a high level of security. Now, it has come out that in 2019, 2 scientists sent deadly pathogens from that virus to the Wuhan Institute for Virology, despite the fact that concerns had been raised already about security protocols at the Wuhan Institute for Virology. And at the time, head of the lab had raised concerns about this transfer, saying that there should have been a materials transfer agreement in place. There was no materials transfer agreement in place. The transfers happened nonetheless. Now, a few months later, the same scientists involved in those transfers, as well as a number of students who were working with them, were expelled from the lab for, quote, policy breaches. And now that's all we know. All we know is that there was this transfer of deadly viruses to the Wuhan Institute for Virology, a laboratory that is affiliated with the Chinese military that works on what's called gain-of-function experiments, which are experiments where you intentionally make a virus more dangerous for research purposes. You make it more transmissible or more deadly. That's what a gain-of-function experiment is. You're playing around with a virus to see just how far you can push it, and doing so in the context of research. So we know that gain-of-function experiments happen at the Wuhan lab, and we know that Canadian, in spite of concerns about security as well as about the nature of the transfer, Canadian scientists sent deadly viruses from the Wuhan Institute, from the Winnipeg lab to the Wuhan Institute for Virology, and then those scientists were expelled. We also know, according to a more recent Globe and Mail report, that there was a person working at that lab, the Winnipeg lab, who was affiliated with the People's Liberation Army Academy of Military Medical Sciences. Now, when you hear the name Academy of Military Medical Sciences, I think for all of us that rings some alarm bells. This is the Chinese Army's Academy of Military Medical Sciences. Now, of course, they're engaged in virology research because we know that viruses can be used for various purposes, including military applications. And there's a broadening category of things that can be used in civilian as well as military applications. So the People's Liberation Army Academy of Military Medical Sciences does work on virology, and there's somebody at the Winnipeg lab who has this affiliation, right? So there are these big questions that are being raised about national security. So the Special Committee on Canada-China Committee, the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, of which I'm the vice chair, has tried to get information and documents about what happened in the Winnipeg lab. We need to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out what the issues are in terms of our security protocols and why we're seeing this seeming presence of the Chinese military, or at least affiliation between individuals with connections to military institutions and the Winnipeg lab. These are important questions to be asking. And we've been trying to get documents. And we understand that there may be sensitivities in these documents, which is why we've asked that they be handed over and reviewed by MPs in private, not just automatically made public. Now, the committee has on multiple occasions passed an order summoning these documents. Now, parliamentary committees in our democracy have a right to summon documents, an unfettered right to access documents. And it's because for me to do my job as an MP, I need to be able to have information about what the government is doing so that I can hold them accountable. If we don't have information about how government is operating, then it becomes very difficult to actually ask the questions we need to ask and represent voters in the context of these processes. So committees have a constitutionally guaranteed right of unfettered access to documents. We exercise that right on multiple occasions. In one case, it was a unanimous vote of the committee. In fact, Liberal MPs voting with Conservative Bloc and NDP MPs to demand these documents. And the Public Health Agency of Canada has steadfastly refused to answer basic questions about this or hand over the documents. Then there was a House of Commons motion, an opposition motion that was passed with all the opposition parties working together, again, demanding these documents. Again, the government refused to hand them over. So at that point, we raised something called a question of privilege. A question of privilege is when you say the fundamental rights that members of parliament are supposed to have as members of parliament that allow them to do their job and represent their constituents, those rights are being attacked. And therefore, there needs to be some remedy. So when you raise a question of privilege, the speaker considers it and the speaker rules on it. And if the speaker finds that there is a prima facie case of a breach of privilege, so if there's on the face of it, it looks like there's a problem of privilege, then he will allow a question of privilege to be moved and a privilege debate to take place. So this then leads to the House of Commons debating that question of privilege, which is what happened this week. The speaker ruled that there was indeed a prima facie case of privilege, and we moved into a debate on a question of privilege. And when there's a debate on a question of privilege, that displaces government legislation. So the government might have wanted us to be debating one of their bills at that time. But the traditions of Parliament have emphasized that questions of privilege are so important that they displace other debates. So we spent, and we're working under extended hours, by the way. So the House of Commons is sitting until midnight, Monday and Wednesday. So we're up until about midnight debating this question of privilege, speaking about the need to access these documents. And when the debate ended, that led to a vote taking place. That vote was deferred. That vote took place on Thursday, at which a majority of the House of Commons voted in favor of that question of privilege. Now, what we voted on in that motion was to summon Ian Stewart, the president of the Public Health Agency, to come to the House of Commons. This is a procedure that hasn't been used in over 100 years, but it just shows how far the Liberals have gone and how prepared we are to continue to fight to access these documents. We're not letting this go. This is the rights of Parliament as well as our national security. We need to find out what happened in the Winnipeg lab. This is about protecting our national security and getting the information we need to do our jobs. So we are summoning Ian Stewart to show up at the House of Commons on Monday. He will be admonished by the Speaker for failing to hand over these documents, and he has been ordered to bring those documents with him. So you hear the government complaining about, we got all this legislation we want to pass. Why is the opposition not letting us pass these bills we want to pass? Well, the fact is, all the government has to do is obey the law, obey the Constitution, and bring the documents that the House of Commons has asked to see. But if they continue to refuse to hand over these documents, then Parliament will continue to have these opportunities to debate and challenge why the government is not handing over these documents. So we have in two cases this week. We have in the case of Bill C-10 and in the case of the issue of the transfer of viruses and the handing over of documents. We have two cases in which Anthony Rota, the Speaker of the House of Commons, has ruled against the government, saying that the government is violating the rules of Parliament, is violating the way things are supposed to happen, and abusing the process. And these failures have triggered events that are slowing down the government's legislative agenda. And all they would have to do if they wanted to address these issues is follow the rules, is respect the rules of committees, follow orders of the House, and hand over documents. This is the law. Let's be clear. You can debate, well, should the motion have passed? Should it have been framed that way? Should the government have sent the documents to a different committee? And this is the conversation the government wants to have. Oh, the documents should have gone to a different committee. The point is, an order of the House of Commons is law. The government has to follow the law. But unfortunately, right now, we're in a situation where the government thinks it's above the law. It just thinks it can decide not to follow the law. Ignore a House order, but still please pass our legislation. Well, the government should listen to the Speaker. They should listen to their own MPs, in fact, on the Canada-China Committee who voted to summon these documents. So that's the big news this week. We have 3 sitting days next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I will be in Ottawa on Monday. We expect to see Ian Stewart, the president of the Public Health Agency, show up and deliver the documents. If he doesn't, that will be another violation of privilege. This is a core question. Does the government respect the role of Parliament or not? Do senior government managers feel that they are accountable to Parliament for their work or not? This is a critical time in our country where we're fighting for freedom of speech. We're fighting for the rights and prerogatives of Parliament, and we will continue that fight. We need your help. Please share this video and help us get out the word about the things that are going on. I do these live updates every week on Friday at 1 o'clock Alberta time, 3 o'clock in Ontario. So please like and follow so that you can receive more of these updates. We'll continue to keep you up to date. But really, we need to share this video. I have to say, this whole issue of the violation of privilege, the government's lack of respect for Parliament, it really hasn't been covered sufficiently in the media. There's been an insufficient attention to what is a very dire situation for Canadian democracy and for the prerogatives of Parliament. Not everybody in the media might care about this, but if you're watching and you care about it, please share. Please help us get the word out about what's happening. And you can find more content about these debates on our page. We have 3 days left in Parliament, and we're going to continue this fight to stand up for democracy, to stand up for the right of access of members of Parliament, to challenge the government on their attacks on freedom of speech, attacks on Parliament, and other fundamental freedoms. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a great week, and I'll be back with more information in between and another one of these live videos in 7 days.